You'd think a man like Nero Wolfe wouldn't get flustered by anything less than sabotage to his orchids, or Fritz putting too much paprika in the veal blanket. But on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, when the heat was hanging around like a bad joke, and I was about ready to throw the fan out the window, someone managed to disturb the sacred peace of the brownstone. And this time, it wasn't a corpse or a client with a fat checkbook. It was a waiter. I was in the office flipping through the Gazette and wondering if Wolfe would be up for taking a case before he started rationing the eggs again, when the doorbell rang. Not the front door, the side entrance, which meant someone either knew better or didn't want to be seen. I opened it and found a guy in a crumpled black vest, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, and an expression that looked like it had just come off a double shift in Hell's dining room. He was around 30, weary, hair slicked back with effort, more than product, and eyes that darted like he was scanning for exits even when there weren't any. He handed me a small envelope without a word and said, "For Mr. Wolfe. He'll want to read it." "Name?" I asked, already guessing I wouldn't get a straight one. He didn't hesitate. "Carlo. That's all. Like the dog." "No," he said, and turned to go. I could have followed him, but honestly, the guy looked like a puff of wind might fold him in half, and the whole thing reeked of something Wolfe might, against all odds, find mildly intriguing. The envelope was thick cream stock, cheap but not grocery store cheap, and sealed with a fingerprint smudge of red wax, like someone had watched too many old movies. I brought it inside, walked past Fritz in the hallway. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, and dropped the envelope on Wolfe's desk like it might bite. He was in his chair, naturally, with a hand resting lightly on the armrest as if thinking was more of a wrist exercise than a cerebral one. He eyed the envelope the way some men look at spiders. A waiter named Carlo dropped it off. I told him. Didn't stay for tea. Wolfe opened it with one quick motion, his thumb pressed under the flap, his forefinger steady. Inside was a folded sheet of plain paper, typed, no signature, no return address. He read it once, then again slower. Then he placed the letter on the desk, adjusted his weight ever so slightly, and said, "We are being invited to dine on something unsavory, Mr. Goodwin. The question is whether we accept the reservation." That sounded promising. "Something criminal?" I asked, hopefully, not in the traditional sense. "It appears to be a matter of principle, of deception, and perhaps revenge." The man identifies himself only as a witness to a manipulation, a betrayal served under the guise of gratitude. "Color me hooked," I said. "Want me to call Saul or Kramer?" "Neither. Not yet." Wolfe pushed back slightly and stared at the ceiling. "We must first confirm that this Carlo is not simply a disgruntled employee. There's mention of a woman, a betrayal, a falsified record, and an accusation veiled in etiquette. It is peculiar enough to warrant scrutiny. The phrase veiled in etiquette could have described half of Manhattan's worst secrets. I reached for the letter. Wolfe let me. The message was short. He gave her a scholarship she didn't apply for. The chef knew, but took the bonus. Anyway, the waiter said nothing, but watched everything. The truth is hidden in the thank you speech. Justice is dew cold. I looked up. That's either the world's vaguest blackmail note or the weirdest Yelp review I've ever read. Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He just tapped the armrest twice. There is motive here, he murmured, and manipulation. The question is, who benefits from silence? And who risks everything by breaking it? I knew that tone. That was the sound of Wolfe stretching his mental limbs, like a bear waking from hibernation, not because he was hungry, but because someone had rattled his den. He turned to me with the slightest crease forming above his nose. We will entertain this puzzle, but you will first ascertain where this man Carlo works, who he waits upon, and who might be delivering unrequested gratitude to whom. Any preference on where I start? I asked, already pulling my jacket from the coat tree. Restaurants, he said, charity galas, university dinners, and women who speak in public with gratitude that masks deceit. That narrowed it down to roughly every socialite with a podium. But I'd done more with less. I tucked the note into my pocket, checked my wallet, and nodded to Fritz as I left as I stepped outside. The city wrapped me in its usual embrace of exhaust and ambition. Somewhere out there, a guy who poured wine for a living knew something someone didn't want known. Wolfe had bitten the hook. Now it was my job to find out who was holding the line and what bait they'd used. The first crack in the brownstone's usual rhythm came just after lunch the next day, which in Wolfe's universe is the time you least expect anything to happen, precisely because he arranges it that way. After a flawless roast squaw with a side of Fritz's genius-level potato gratin, Wolfe was headed back upstairs to inspect his orchids when the doorbell rang, the front one this time, and with the kind of insistence that implied whoever was behind it hadn't read the manual on approaching Nero Wolfe. I was already halfway down the hall, pausing only long enough to wipe a bit of sauce off my tie when I opened the door. She was in her 40s, immaculately dressed, and carrying the kind of purse that costs more than my monthly salary, though she held it like it weighed a ton. Her hair was pinned into a blonde twist so tight it looked like it could snap if she turned her head too fast. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent," she said. "I'm Archie Goodwin. I'm the sieve things pass through before they hit him. You want to give me your name and a clue about what's urgent?" She hesitated, then squared her shoulders like she'd spent a life doing just that. "Claire Tolland. I'm the director of the Carrington Foundation." That rang a bell, not a loud one, but enough to stir the mental filing cabinet. Carrington was one of those philanthropic outfits that handed out scholarships and social grants, often to people who didn't expect to get them, and sometimes, I'd heard, to people who didn't deserve them. I stepped aside and let her in, leading her to the office. Wolfe, who should have been waist-deep in his orchids and wholly unreachable, was seated in his chair, hands folded over his girth like he'd been waiting for her since breakfast. "Don't ask me how he does it, Miss Tolland," he said without inflection. "You're early." That caught me off guard. Claire blinked. "You were expecting me?" "No, but I expected someone connected to the matter Carlo alluded to." "You will, I presume, sit." She did, primly, adjusting her posture. Like she was in front of a panel. Wolfe didn't offer anything further. It was her move. "I don't know what the waiter told you," she said, "but I came because something's off. One of our recipients, our top recipient this year, in fact was awarded a full scholarship to St. Elmo's University. The vote was unanimous on paper, but I don't remember casting mine. I also don't remember the young woman, Minna Drellick, ever applying." Wolfe's brows lifted a fraction of an inch. I took that as a signal to pull out my notebook. "You believe the process was subverted?" he asked. Claire nodded, not overtly. "But things don't add up. The application wasn't in the first round of selections. Suddenly, in the second round, there it was. Perfect scores. Glowing recommendations. And then this speech Minna gave it at our annual gala 2 nights ago. She thanked us, of course, but something in her tone felt strained, rehearsed. She said she was so honored to be chosen by surprise. That stuck with me. And the chef?" Wolfe asked mildly. She blinked again. "What?" Wolfe leaned back slightly. "The chef took a bonus. Carlo's letter mentioned it. The implication being that silence was purchased." Claire's face went white for a second, and I made a mental note of that. "I didn't know about that," she said slowly, "but I wouldn't be surprised. Felix, the head chef, has been with us for years. He's dependable, but pliable." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "Tell me, who would benefit from Minna Drellick receiving that scholarship?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then gave a small, bitter laugh. "I was hoping you could tell me that." Wolfe said nothing. I could tell he was already assembling pieces in that mind of his. He never needed all the corners to start the picture. I saw Claire out myself. She gave me her card, told me to call if anything came up, and walked down the steps with the dignity of a woman trying not to look like she was walking away from a burning house. Back inside, I stood with Wolfe in the office. He had the letter from Carlo back in his hand, and he was tapping it against his palm like a conductor measuring time. "What do you think?" I asked. He didn't look up. "I think, Mr. Goodwin, that this woman has stepped carefully into a mess she may already suspect she helped create. I also think this Minna Drellick will prove a worthwhile subject of inquiry. You want me to find her?" "Yes, and interview the chef, and, if possible, determine who Minna Drellick knows with enough influence to insert her into a system designed to be impartial, names, dates, and affiliations. We are not investigating fraud. We are dissecting manipulation." I was halfway to the door when Wolfe added, "And Archie, yeah, observe her speech, the recording. If one exists, I suspect our anonymous waiter was not referring only to content, but to delivery. Words reveal, performance conceals. That is where truth lingers, which, translated to Goodwin speak, meant I had a busy afternoon ahead and possibly a bad cup of coffee or two in my future. But if Wolfe was onto something, and he usually was, then this wasn't just about a falsified scholarship. It was about power, leverage, and favors traded in whispers. And someone, somewhere, had just tipped their hand in front of the wrong waiter. By the time I got to the Carrington Foundation's Midtown office, it was just past 3 p.m., and the receptionist was doing her best impression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I gave her Claire Tollin's card, told her I was following up on a scholarship inquiry, and did it all with my most charming smile. She didn't smile back, but she did pick up the phone. Claire wasn't in. She had a meeting off-site and wouldn't be back until tomorrow. But the receptionist, Sasha, according to the gold nameplate pinned slightly off-center, wasn't entirely immune to charm. When I told her I was doing a background check for verification purposes, she tapped a few keys and gave me a printed list of the scholarship committee. 5 names. Claire, of course, as director. Then Harold Cormick, finance chair, doctor. Margot Leland, education advisor, Ellis Pruitt, PR director, and Desmond J., legal consultant. All internal, all within arm's reach if you had the right access card. Before I left, I asked Sasha if she remembered anything unusual about this year's top recipient, Minna Drellick. I said. She hesitated. She's the one who gave the speech, right? Correct. What do you remember? She was quiet, polite, didn't really mingle much after the gala. Most recipients stick around for photos or drinks. She just slipped out after the speech. Kind of odd. I thanked her and walked out with the list in my pocket and a few new thoughts brewing. People who get surprise scholarships usually can't stop grinning. Minna, it seemed, couldn't get away fast enough. Next stop was St. Elmo's University, specifically the registrar's office, where I could confirm whether Minna Drellick had applied. Through the usual channels, after 15 minutes of polite lying and mild badge flashing, I found out she had, in fact, submitted an application late 2 weeks past the standard deadline, and somehow it had bypassed the usual review panel. It had been approved with a note, exception granted, full endorsement from Carrington Foundation. It didn't take a genius to figure out someone at Carrington had pulled strings. I asked if they had a copy of her application on file. They didn't. It had been submitted electronically, but the file had been marked as external referral and archived, meaning no original documentation was available for me to peek at. Convenient. I called Wolfe from a payphone just outside the main quad. She applied late. I told him. Got pushed through anyway. No supporting file, just a referral tag. Looks like someone at Carrington jammed her into the system with no questions asked. Wolfe was silent a moment. Then, proceed. You will now interview the members of the committee. Any order you prefer. Begin with Mr. Cormick. Financial men often understand corruption best. He hung up. By the time I reached Harold Cormick's office, an aggressively beige suite inside a downtown bank tower, he was packing up for the day. Early 50s, stiff collar, glasses with rims so thin they looked like wire illusions, and a handshake that felt like shaking a paper towel roll. He didn't object to me asking a few questions. In fact, he seemed more irritated than threatened. Minna Drellick, yes, I signed off on her, he said, adjusting his tie. I assumed the others had vetted her. Honestly, Archie, we move fast. Sometimes you trust the people you work with, even when it's someone who wasn't in the first round of applicants. His jaw ticked. You're implying I noticed that. I didn't. I don't memorize the order of candidates. Who do you trust on that panel to catch that kind of thing? Cormac gave me a tired smile. Claire. Desmond. Maybe. Pruitt's. A gas bag. Leland's thorough, but absent-minded. I trust Claire to do her job. I made a mental note. That was the second time Claire's name came up as the de facto voice of reason. Next up was Dr. Margot Leland over at the university. She had a tiny office in the education wing filled with dusty shelves, antique globes, and a desk stacked like a lost expedition to the Amazon. She reminded me of a librarian from a children's book. Cardigan, bun, and a voice that never rose above lecture whisper. When I asked about Minna, she paused, folded her hands, and said, I found her application surprisingly polished. Surprisingly how? Well, most students, especially those from public backgrounds, tend to have writing that's sincere but unrefined. Minna's essay was fluent, structured, even literary, too literary, perhaps, too good to be true. Leland didn't say yes, but she didn't say no, either. And you approved it. I deferred to the group. Claire said she'd looked into Minna's background personally. That was good enough for me. Claire again. I was starting to get the feeling she either had a good poker face or had been dealt the whole deck's. Ellis Pruitt, the PR director, was next. He worked out of a sleek office covered in plaques, champagne photos, and branded stationery. He offered me a drink, which I declined, and talked like a man auditioning for a radio show. Minna Drellick, he said with a dramatic sigh, a sweet girl, not very charismatic. I didn't think she'd be the best choice for a speech, honestly, but Claire insisted. She said Minna deserved it. Deserved it how? She didn't elaborate. She just said Minna had overcome things, had a story worth celebrating, the kind of narrative we like to promote. Did you read the application? I skimmed it. Honestly, we're more concerned with the optics, if someone's been approved. I trust the decision's solid. And there it was again. Trust in Claire. Or maybe fear of challenging her. Last on the list was Desmond J., the legal consultant. His office was the neatest by far. Nothing out of place. Not even a paperclip. He had the demeanor of a man who billed in 6-minute increments and hated wasting even half of one. When I brought up Minna, he barely blinked. I'm aware of the case, he said. I reviewed the legality of granting her an exception. So you knew she applied late. I did. I flagged it. Claire overruled. She said there were extenuating circumstances. Like, she wouldn't say. She said it was delicate. She offered to file a confidentiality waiver if I insisted. But by that point the decision was made. I wasn't going to burn the house down over one applicant. I leaned back in my chair. Would you now? Jay looked at me flatly. Depends who's holding the matches. When I left his office, it was pushing 6. I grabbed a cab back to the brownstone, heartburn starting to nag at the edges, and spent the ride reviewing my mental notes. Everyone had the same story. Minna got in late. Her application was suspiciously perfect. Claire vouched for her. And no one questioned it because Claire had earned that kind of weight. I walked into the office and handed Wolfe the sheet I'd typed up with the summaries. He read them silently while Fritz served a tray with iced water and capon salad. When Wolfe finished, he looked up. So, 5 suspects, all complicit by omission or perhaps intent. But only one holds the key. Claire, I said. Perhaps. He tapped his temple. But I suspect the girl herself knows something. Something she wished to say covertly. Carlo said the truth is in her speech. You won't need to track down the recording. Yes, and Archie, he fixed me with a glare. Be subtle. The more they realize what's under examination, the quicker they'll start sewing lips shut. I nodded. Understood. Want me to bring Saul in? Not yet. Let us first see what the waiter saw. The others may still think no one is watching. He picked up his fork and motioned to Fritz. Now, let us eat. Treachery is easier to digest with endive and wine. Wolfe finished his capon, made an arch remark about the intellectual bankruptcy of bank-sponsored foundations, and waved me off like I was a fly in his line of sight. That meant one thing. I had a full evening ahead of me digging through a mystery, wrapped in polite philanthropy, tied with a bow of bureaucratic silence. I started with the obvious. The gala. If Minadrelic gave a speech there that rattled a waiter enough to write Wolfe a poetic tip-off, then I needed to see that speech, and in this town. Events like the Carrington Foundation Gala didn't happen without a camera rolling. The Foundation's website was a glossy PR snowstorm donor photos, cheerful copy about social mobility, and a carousel of scholarship winners. No video. But I knew how these things worked. If the speech had been filmed, the PR team would have handled it. That meant Ellis Pruitt, so I called him, disguised my impatience, and asked sweetly whether they had a recording of the gala for archival purposes. Of course we do, he said, smug as a man wearing his own press release. We film everything. Why? Just checking for a piece I'm doing on youth rhetoric, I said. Wanted to highlight a few promising young speakers. You know, the voices of tomorrow. He loved that. Come by tomorrow, and I'll have the file queued up for you. I agreed, then hung up and called Saul Panzer. Wolfe had said not to bring him in yet, but Saul wasn't a hammer, he was a scalpel. I asked him to dig into Minadrelic's background without setting off alarm. Bells, school records, employment, any social affiliations. Anything that smelled like leverage or quiet strings being pulled. Then I turned my attention to the chef Felix, the pliable cook who allegedly took a bonus for keeping quiet. The Foundation Gala had been catered by Armand's, a high-end joint, near the park. That gave me an excuse to drop by, flash a smile, and pretend I was booking a future event. Felix turned out to be a wide-shouldered Frenchman with skin like grilled trout, and an accent that showed up only when it suited him. He met me in a back corner of the restaurant while a sous chef grated parmesan. Like it owed him money. You catered the Carrington event last week, I said casually. What was that like? Routine? Politicians? Donors? Chicken in truffle? Sauce? A girl made a speech. Nobody clapped. Minadrelic. He shrugged. They told me her name. I was busy keeping Sophals alive. I pushed a little. Word is there was a bonus offered. A quiet one. Any truth to that? He turned slowly. You have the wrong pan, monsieur. I gave him a smile. I don't think I do. But I also Don't think you're the kind of guy who volunteers to get grilled for someone else's cover-up. So, who offered the bonus? He licked his teeth like he was tasting the question. Claire Tolland, 200 in an envelope, said it was for excellence under pressure. I did not ask questions. Did she say anything else? She said it was important that no one approached the girl after the speech. Let her slip away. She said, now that was interesting. The same Claire who insisted Minna give the speech also paid to make sure. No one talked to her afterward. I left Felix with a nod and returned to the cab with more puzzle pieces. Then I knew what to do with. If Claire had wanted Minna's speech to make an impression, why muzzle her afterward? And if she didn't want the speech heard, why insist she give it? The next day, I showed up at the Carrington offices at 11 a.m. sharp. Pruitt had a laptop open on the conference table and a USB plugged in like it was holding the secret to life. He hit play with the flair of a man showing off a masterpiece. Minna Drellick stepped up to the podium in a sea-green dress, shoulders squared but eyes down. Her voice, when it came, was soft but controlled. I never expected to be here, she began. I didn't even apply in time. But someone believed in me. Someone saw something I didn't. I watched closely. Wolfe had said the performance was the key. And sure enough, there it was. Half a second of hesitation. Her eyes drifted stage left, towards someone we couldn't see. A tight swallow, then a line. Not everyone gets a chance like this. Sometimes it comes because you've suffered. Sometimes it comes because someone else has. The room clapped. She nodded. End scene. Pruitt looked smug. See? Humble, hopeful. She's a great story. Yeah, I said. Great story. But I wasn't hearing a grateful scholarship recipient. I was hearing code. That speech wasn't a thank you. It was a confession with the edges sanded off. I thanked Pruitt, copied the file, and left. Back at the brownstone, I handed the video over to Wolfe and gave him the summary. She didn't write that speech herself, I said. Or if she did, she laced it with signals. Someone suffered, someone else benefited. That's what she was trying to say without saying it. Wolfe didn't respond. He was already watching the footage. Twice. By the time he was done, his fingers were templed and his mouth a flat line. She is not a liar, he said. But she has been used. Claire? I asked. Possibly, or someone Claire is protecting. This is not blackmail. It is guilt, dispersed through bureaucracy. Someone rearranged the truth and expected her silence. A minute later, the phone rang. It was Saul. I put him on speaker. I've got something, he said. Minna Drellick was expelled from her last school 6 months ago. Academic dishonesty. I whistled. That wasn't on the application. Nope. But guess who paid? The settlement to keep it quiet. Let me guess, I said. Claire Tolland. Nope. Ellis Pruitt. The PR guy. Wolfe's eyes opened half an inch. Why? That's murky. But he transferred funds from his department's discretionary budget to a legal firm that handled the case. Sealed agreement. No paper trail except the payment itself. I looked at Wolfe. So Pruitt pushes her through. Claire approves the speech. Pays the chef to keep things quiet. And Minna stands there thanking everyone for giving her a second chance. No, Wolfe said, not a second chance, a diversion. He stood slowly, walked to his globe, and gave it a slow turn. That meant he was lining up the facts like chess pieces. Arrange a meeting, he said. With who? Everyone. All 5 committee members, Minna if possible, and Carlo the waiter if you can find him. Here, tomorrow evening. I raised an eyebrow. You planning to serve justice cold? He glanced at me with faint irritation. I plan to serve it in my office. Temperature is irrelevant. The next morning began like any other at the brownstone. Fritz prepping calf's liver with shallots. Wolfe sipping coffee as if the beans had betrayed him. And me working the phones with the kind of patience that comes from long exposure to bureaucracy. By noon, I had confirmations from everyone Wolfe requested: Claire Tolland, Dr. Leland, Cormac, Pruitt, Desmond J., and, with a little extra wrangling, Minna Drellick herself. Carlo the waiter, however, had vanished like smoke. The number he'd left on his delivery slip was disconnected, and Armand said he hadn't shown up for his last 2 shifts. That didn't sit right with me. The guy practically kicked this whole thing off, and now he was missing. Either he spooked himself or someone gave him a reason to. I filed that under urgent, but currently untraceable, and focused on setting up Wolfe's office. For the verbal showdown, Wolfe didn't want theatrics. No lighting tricks, no chairs arranged like a police lineup. Just the usual. His throne-like chair behind the desk, 6 seats in a half-arc facing him, and the temperature in the room adjusted to a degree that encouraged discomfort without outright sweating. Wolfe believed pressure worked best in silence and slight humidity. By late afternoon, something unexpected disrupted the otherwise choreographed day. Fritz came into the office holding a small wooden box, no bigger than a jewelry case. With a puzzled look I'd only seen once before the day. Someone delivered anchovy-stuffed figs to the kitchen. This was left at the back door, he said. No note. Wolfe tilted his head. Set it here. Fritz placed it gently on the edge of the desk and retreated like it might explode. I examined the box first. Plain oak. No insignia. Inside was a single object, a tarnished teaspoon. Nothing else. No message. No initials. Just a spoon that looked like it had been through 100 dishwashers and one minor war. I looked up. This a prank? Wolfe stared at it for a long moment. It's not a prank. It's a warning. From who? Someone who has been in this house. That got my attention. Wolfe didn't elaborate, so I picked up the spoon and examined it. Nothing jumped out, so I set it down. You thinking someone's been poking around? Yes, he said. You will check my desk drawer. 3rd on the right. Tell me what you find. I opened it. Wolfe's drawers were ranged with the kind of precision usually reserved for neurosurgeons and master watchmakers. But something was off. A pen was slightly askew. One of the coasters had been moved 1/2 inch. That may sound like nothing, but in Wolfe's universe, it was like walking in and finding the chair upside down. Someone's been in here, I said. He nodded once. Fritz? Locked the office when I left this morning. No deliveries. No visitors except the mail. And you had me across town all day, remember? Indeed. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Something has been tampered with, not stolen shifted. We are being warned, or baited. By who? Claire. No, she would never enter my home uninvited, nor would she instruct anyone to do so. The only person among our subjects with both access and absence is Pruitt, Ellis Pruitt, the PR man with too many glossy photos and a discretionary fund large enough to cover hush money. He had the smooth hands, the easy grin, and now, apparently, a reason to panic. Why a spoon? I asked. It was symbolic. He tampered with something while masking his real intent. A culinary sleight of hand. He's trying to signal innocence through absurdity. Or, I said, he's covering tracks. That too. Wolfe leaned back. What was disturbed tells me something. But more importantly, what was not? My appointment book was not touched. The safe remained locked. The letter from Carlo still here. The only thing that shifted was the guest list. I got it then. Pruitt had been in the house. He hadn't taken anything. But he wanted to know who would be there tonight. Maybe he was looking for Carlo's name. Maybe he was hoping to erase someone's involvement. Either way, he had walked into the lion's den, sniffed around, and left a spoon behind as if to say, I can come back whenever I want. Wolfe didn't call the police. Of course not. That would have broken the cadence. Instead, he did what Wolfe always did when pushed. He doubled down on control. You will make one call, he said. To Minna. What am I telling her? Nothing. You are listening. Invite her to tea. Ask if she prefers lemon or honey. And listen. That sounded cryptic. But I'd long ago stopped demanding clarity from Wolfe when he was in one of his deduction spirals. I called Minna. She was nervous, but agreed to come early, around 5. Before the others, she said she didn't mind talking to me informally first. She even asked if Wolfe would be present. He may be, I said, but I'll be handling most of it. When she arrived, I met her at the door. She was the same girl from the video, composed but trembling beneath the surface, like someone wearing a coat, 2 sizes too big to hide a bruise. We sat in the front room while Fritz brought tea. I offered lemon or honey. Neither, she said quietly, just plain. That told me something. She wasn't here to be soothed. She was here to be heard. I kept it simple. You didn't want to give that speech, did you? She hesitated. No. But Claire insisted. She said it was part of the terms. That if I wanted the scholarship to stay, I had to perform. Perform how? She gave me the speech. She said if I edited anything, they'd revoke the offer. But she didn't write it either. Who did? I think it was Mr. Pruitt. It sounded like him. And the part about someone suffering. She looked up. That was mine. I added it without permission. I had to say something. What happened, Minna? Really? She drew a breath. I never applied. I mean, I did. But I was rejected. Then someone from the foundation called me and said there was a mistake, that I'd been selected after all. But it didn't feel real. Then I found out about the agreement. I'd been part of a settlement. A donor's son had tried something. There was a payoff. I was told it would never happen again. Then the scholarship appeared. My gut twisted. So you were bought off. And when you didn't stay quiet enough, they tried to push you back under. She didn't nod. She didn't have to. I think Mr. Pruitt thought I'd just go along with it. He said the speech would make me look strong, that it would make the foundation look generous. And Claire, she cried. Minna whispered. She said she didn't know about the original incident, that she only found out after the scholarship was approved. But by then, it was already in motion. I stood, walked to the office, and opened the door. Wolfe sat in his chair, perfectly still. She's ready, I said, and so is your storm. At precisely 6:45 p.m. The brownstone received its full dose of agitation. One by one, they arrived Claire Tolland in a slate-grey suit and lacquered Cormac in a banker's uniform of navy and resentment. Dr. Leland fluttering in like a wine-blown page from an ethics textbook. Desmond J. with the wary look of a man who knew too much, but had been paid to forget it. And Ellis Pruitt with that immaculate hair and polished confidence, walking like he owned the very air between the front door and Wolfe's chair. None of them spoke much as Fritz ushered them into the office. Claire offered a tight smile. Cormac adjusted his cufflink 3 times before sitting. Leland clutched her handbag like it might bolt. Jay sat near the edge of his seat, perfectly upright. Pruitt, he looked like he thought this was a marketing meeting and he was here to sign autographs. Wolfe didn't say a word until they were all seated. When he did, his voice was as dry as dusted parchment. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Your presence is not requested, it is required. This evening, we will disassemble an arrangement of silence and unacknowledged harm. Mr. Goodwin, proceed. That was my cue. I stepped to the side of the desk with a notepad in hand, mostly for effect. Let's start with a girl named Minna Drellick, I said. You all signed off on her scholarship, but she never submitted a complete application through the standard process. Someone inserted her name and backdated a justification. Someone smoothed the vote. Someone else filed a discretionary payout to cover a legal settlement involving a donor's son, and said recipient. That money came from the PR budget. The signature on the approval was yours, Mr. Pruitt. The room was silent. Ellis Pruitt leaned forward slightly. That's a serious accusation. No, Ellis, Wolfe said, without moving a muscle. That is a fact. Claire's face paled. I continued. You paid off the legal firm that handled the quiet settlement. You then insisted Minna give a speech that you or someone working for you wrote, framing the foundation as a lifeline for a victim who was never supposed to speak. Claire finally spoke. I didn't know about the assault. I swear it. I believe the scholarship was about redemption. Wolfe looked at her evenly. No, Miss Tolland. You believed it was about optics. You trusted Mr. Pruitt to handle it cleanly, and in return, you preserved the illusion of order. Jay broke in. We all signed off. None of us questioned it. That's on us. That may be, Wolfe said, but guilt diffused among many does not absolve the one who lit the fuse. Pruitt's smile faded for the first time. This is ridiculous, he said, voice rising. I've done nothing illegal. Wolfe gestured toward a side table. On it sat the tarnished spoon. You entered my office without invitation. You tampered with its contents. You attempted to learn whether your name appeared in a letter written by a man now conveniently absent. That was your trespass, not physical, but strategic. The silence was absolute. Cormac muttered, "Is this being recorded?" "No." Wolfe replied, "But it is being remembered." Dr. Leland looked at Claire. "Is this true?" Claire said nothing. Her hands were folded, knuckles. White. Wolfe turned to her. "You are the only one who attempted to shield Minadrelic. You paid the chef. You instructed silence. Why?" Her voice cracked. "Because I couldn't undo what had already been done. Ellis told me it had all been handled. I found out after the donor's son had left the country. Legal said we'd risk everything if the story got out. The scholarship was supposed to make it right. But it wasn't my idea." "No," Wolfe said. "It was Mr. Pruitt's. He sought to convert liability into a narrative. He constructed a redemption arc from someone else's pain. I watched Pruitt. He was sweating now, barely noticeable under the collar, but there. Finally, she agreed," he said. Minna agreed to the speech. She agreed under threat of losing her future. Wolfe corrected. "You offered her a script and a stage, but not a voice." Jay cleared his throat. "If this gets out, the foundation collapses. It may deserve to," Wolfe said, without pity. "But that is not my concern. My concern is justice." Cold. As it was served, Wolfe's fingers met beneath his chin. Carlo witnessed the exchange. He saw the envelope passed to the chef. He saw Pruitt approach Minna with rehearsals. He left us a breadcrumb. But now, Carlo is missing. Pruitt raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Wolfe ignored him. Miss Drellick risked her safety to insert a line into a controlled script. It was not a mistake, it was a coded cry. Leland finally spoke again. "I thought it was just poetic." "No," Wolfe said. "It was precise. Because poetry, Dr. Leland, is often the last refuge of the silenced." Pruitt stood. "You have no authority to sit down," Wolfe said, and the room obeyed. Pruitt sat. Wolfe continued. "I will not call the police. Not yet. But I have advised Miss Drellick to retain legal counsel. I have also provided a transcript of this meeting to a private attorney who specializes in institutional cover-ups. He will hold it until she decides what to do." Cormac rubbed his temples. "So what do you want?" Wolfe looked at him. "That depends on what you do next." Claire stood then, slowly. "I'll resign," she said. "Effective immediately." "No," Wolfe said. "You will stay. You will make this right. Transparency. Reparation. Whatever justice you are capable of salvaging, do it. That is the only reason I do not call Inspector Kramer right now." She nodded, stunned but steady. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie?" "Yeah." "Show them out." One by one, they left. No one spoke. Pruitt was the last to leave. He turned at the threshold. "You don't know the whole story." "No," Wolfe said, "but I know enough." The door closed. Wolfe let out a breath like he'd been holding it for an hour. I poured him a glass of brandy without asking. So, I said. Justice, no, Wolfe said. A facsimile. The office was quiet after they left to quiet. Wolfe's brandy sat untouched on the desk. He didn't reach for it, didn't shift in his chair, didn't even blink at the window. That was Wolfe's version of stillness before a storm. Not outside, but within. He had laid the bait, triggered reactions, and now he was watching the ripples. I sat across from him and waited. The thing about Wolfe, he didn't narrate what he was doing. He arranged facts like a man setting bone china, delicately, strategically, and only once he had every piece exactly where he wanted it. I finally broke. The silence. That meeting rattled Pruitt more than he let on. He was sweating under that tuxedo polish. Yes, Wolfe said. He now knows that whatever game he played is over. He is no longer managing a narrative. He is a cornered manipulator scrambling to redefine what exposure looks like. Do you think he'll run? No, Wolfe said. Not yet. Men like Pruitt don't run until they've rewritten the story to cast themselves as the victim. He's preparing a statement, a redirection, something to wash away his role and recast it as noble compromise. I nodded. Claire looked like she'd been pushed off a cliff and asked to build wings on the way down. She's not innocent, Wolfe said, but she is salvageable. She may genuinely believe she was protecting the Foundation. That belief is her weakness and her leverage. She will now attempt restitution to cleanse her complicity. Good. Let her. What about Desmond J? Wolfe pursed his lips. He is the least compromised. He saw. He suspected. And he hesitated. Legally. Prudent. Ethically passive. He will stay silent unless prompted. Leave him be for now. And Leland, a fool. Not a fraud. She permitted emotion to override discipline. Her role is ornamental. I sat forward. That leaves us with Cormac and, of course, Pruitt. Cormac will follow power. If Claire repositions herself as a reformer, he will side with her. If Pruitt regains traction, he'll pivot. And Pruitt. Wolfe said with a glint of something cold in his eye, is dangerous. That got my attention. Wolfe didn't throw round words, like dangerous, lightly. He has access. He has charm. He has institutional backing. And he has motive to bury this, to recast it, or to destroy the evidence that remains. Like Carlo. Wolfe finally looked at me. Yes, Carlo is the only external witness. The others are part of the ecosystem. Carlo is the wild card. And now he's gone. I stood. You want me to find him? No. Wolfe said, I want Saul to find him. I picked up the phone and made the call, while I arranged Saul's new assignment. Wolfe dictated a memo to a private legal contact, one of the few men Wolfe respected in that realm. It was brief, precise, and, if I'm being honest, quietly threatening. It laid out the facts of the case, the risk to the Foundation, and the pending exposure should they attempt to retaliate against Miss Strelick. By the next morning, the pressure had begun to mount. The Carrington Foundation released a statement to the press, preemptively announcing an internal audit of its scholarship review process. It was slick, full of words like transparency and accountability, the kind of white noise meant to sound like action while doing nothing. Wolfe read the release with mild disdain. Predictable, but smart, I said. It buys them time. Only if we permit it. At 11:30, Saul called. "I've got Carlo." "Alive?" Wolfe asked. "Yes, nervous, but not hurt. He's been hiding at his sister's apartment in Yonkers. Said someone followed him 2 nights ago, right after he delivered the letter. He got spooked." Wolfe tapped the edge of his desk. "Bring him here. Now." By 2 p.m., Carlo was seated in our office, hunched and fidgeting. Fritz brought him coffee, which he didn't touch. I sat beside him while Wolfe watched from behind his desk like a spider in a web. "I told you everything in that letter," Carlo said. "What more do you need?" "You were followed," Wolfe said. "By whom?" "I don't know. Guy in a coat. Same guy who came by the kitchen the day after the gala, asking if I'd seen Minna talking to anyone. Said he was a friend." "Describe him," I said. "Tall, expensive watch. Knew my name. Pruitt." "It had to be." Wolfe leaned forward. "Carlo, you are now central to a very delicate matter. I can protect you, but I must ask if you're willing to speak publicly." Carlo looked like he'd swallowed a handful of broken glass. "I don't want trouble. I just wanted someone to know." "They will know," Wolfe said. "But your safety is paramount. You will remain here. Mr. Goodwin will arrange temporary residence. Saul will handle security." Carlo's shoulders sagged. "Thank you." After he left the room with Saul, Wolfe turned to me. "Pruitt is accelerating. He attempted intimidation. He will now attempt erasure." "Minna?" I asked. "She is safe. Claire arranged a temporary stay for her out of the city." That surprised me. "She didn't tell us." "No," Wolfe said. "But she told Desmond J., who told Fritz this morning. A quiet message." I smiled. "So they're leaking upward, hoping you'll notice." "Yes," Wolfe said. "They are beginning to understand the gravity. That is my design." I walked to the window. "And now," Wolfe said, standing slowly, "we invite Mr. Pruitt back. You think he'll come? He has no choice. He still believes he can steer this. Let him try." So I called him. Told him Wolfe wished to clarify a few misunderstandings from the previous meeting. Told him he could bring legal counsel if he preferred. He laughed. "I'm happy to come alone. I'm sure it's all just been a misreading of intentions, of course." I said, "We'll be expecting you at 8 p.m. when I hung up." Wolfe was already seated, hands together, eyes closed. "Prepare the room," he said. "No one else, just him. The air must be still for the final unraveling." I turned to go, but paused. "You sure he won't come armed with lawyers, spin, and a smile?" "Oh, he will," Wolfe said. "But tonight, we aren't confronting a narrative. We are confronting a man. And if he lies to me again, I will bury him with silence." Pruitt arrived at 8:02 p.m., just late enough to establish dominance, just early enough to pretend it wasn't calculated. He wore a double-breasted charcoal suit and an expression polished to a mirror shine. No lawyer in tow, no briefcase, just a man with both hands in his pockets and the smug look of someone who still believed the story could be salvaged if he delivered the next line right. I opened the door and gestured him in without ceremony. Wolfe had instructed no small talk, no tea, no trimmings. The air was dense. The office lights cast their usual warm glow, but everything in the room felt cooler, harder. Pruitt noticed it immediately. His confident gait paused for half a second when he saw the chair set opposite Wolfe's desk, solitary and square to his scrutiny. "Evening," he said, nodding to me. Then Wolfe. "Hope this isn't another trial by theatre." Wolfe didn't answer. He waited for Pruitt to sit. When he did, Wolfe spoke. "Mr. Pruitt, you have come here of your own volition." "Yes. You understand the implications of our prior discussion." Pruitt gave a slow nod. "I understand that you believe something unsavory happened regarding the scholarship, but I also believe you're mistaken in how you've arranged the facts." "No," Wolfe said flatly, "the facts are arranged as they occurred. What remains is the interpretation. That is where you now sit between what you can explain and what you cannot." Pruitt gave a small chuckle. "With all due respect, Mr. Wolfe, this isn't a courtroom, and your client, if that's what she is, isn't pressing charges." "No," Wolfe agreed, "because she is still debating whether justice is better served by courts or by clarity." Pruitt's smile tightened. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" "It is a premise," Wolfe replied, "and I suggest you address it with care." I stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the exchange unfold like a slow, deliberate game of fencing. Wolfe continued. "You authorized a payment from your department's discretionary fund to a legal firm. That represented a settlement involving Minna Drellick and a donor's son. You then inserted Miss Drellick into the scholarship program under a falsified narrative. You orchestrated her appearance at the foundation gala. You scripted her speech. And you ensured the event was framed as a testament to the foundation's redemptive generosity rather than what it truly was, a cover." Pruitt leaned forward. "That's a dramatic retelling of events that had more complexity than you're acknowledging." "Yes, I authorized the payout on the advice of our legal team. Yes, I encouraged Claire to back the scholarship because the damage had been done and Minna deserved something. We gave her a path forward, a path you defined," Wolfe corrected, "and controlled. One that required her silence, her gratitude, and her performance." Pruitt's voice dropped. "It wasn't coercion. It was compromise, spoken like a man who's used both interchangeably." Pruitt straightened. "You think I'm a villain here, but I fixed something the board didn't want to touch. They wanted the story to go away. I made it inspiring. You sanitized a violation," Wolfe said, "and then built a platform atop it. I spoke then. And what about Carlo?" Pruitt turned toward me slowly. "Who, Carlo? The waiter who saw everything, who wrote to us, who disappeared?" Pruitt didn't flinch. "You're implying I made him disappear?" "No," Wolfe said calmly. "We're stating that your attempts to find him, to trace the source of the leak, included intimidation, surveillance, possibly bribery. That's absurd." Wolfe tapped a small folder on his desk. "We have statements from Carlo, from the chef, from Miss Drellick. You've spent weeks constructing walls around a single truth. And now that truth is sitting beside you, breathing down your neck." Pruitt's tone sharpened. What do you want? Nothing, Wolfe said. Pruitt blinked. Nothing? I don't want reparation. I don't want silence. I don't even want an apology. I want documentation. I want your confession in writing. I want a record of your orchestration signed, detailed, and preserved, not for blackmail, not for leverage, for the sake of clarity, should Miss Drellick ever require proof. Pruitt's face shifted: confidence, calculation, and then something rare: fear. You're bluffing. No, Wolfe said. I'm offering you a path forward. You speak plainly on paper. You walk away. If she ever chooses to come forward legally, your document may spare you a public trial. If not, it sits untouched. But if you refuse, I will submit a full report to the university, the press, and the legal representatives we've retained. You will not control the narrative. You will drown in it. Pruitt stood abruptly, hands clenched. You think you can corner me like some second-rate crook? No, Wolfe said. You're not second-rate. You're clever, manipulative, and, until now, effective. But not invincible. He motioned to me. I took a single sheet from the folder and slid it across the desk. A preamble. Your confession begins with the statement of intent. You fill in the rest. Pruitt stared at the paper. This is madness. It is opportunity, Wolfe replied. Your last one. There was silence. Then the soft sound of a pen being removed from an inner pocket. He sat. He wrote. It took 30 minutes. Not all at once he stopped, rewrote, crossed out names, and rephrased sentences. But he wrote it. Wolfe watched without speaking. I stood like a statue, and when Pruitt finally finished, he placed the pen down, signed the bottom, and folded the page. You're smug, he said. I'm precise, Wolfe replied. Pruitt left without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. I turned to Wolfe. You think he'll run now? No, Wolfe said. He'll wait. He'll watch. And when the pressure fades, he'll re-emerge with a new title somewhere else. That is his nature. But the damage is done. No, Wolfe said, slowly reaching for his brandy. The damage has been contained. The truth documented. The girl is safe. The waiter has returned. The circle has closed. He sipped. That is all we can hope for. And just like that, the brown stone was still again. It was the next morning when Wolfe summoned me into the office, not with his usual bell or a sharp bark down the hall, but a quiet, uncharacteristic "Archief, you would." That's how I knew the curtain was ready to be pulled back. He was seated at his desk in the same posture I'd seen him assume for interrogations, client verdicts, and on one memorable occasion, a very serious conversation about Fritz's decision to substitute white pepper for black. But this wasn't one of those times. This was final positioning, the reveal. He gestured to the envelope on the desk. It was sealed, thick, yellowed slightly at the edges from the pressure of its contents. I picked it up and waited. That, Wolfe said, is Pruitt's confession, annotated with supplementary evidence. It is to be delivered to the Carrington Foundation's board chair privately. No press, no ceremony. They will have no choice but to act. You're not giving it to Claire. She will see it, Wolfe replied. But only after the board has read it and been forced to confront what she allowed to happen under her watch. Claire has chosen contrition, but she must also endure consequence. I nodded, and Minna. Wolfe steepled his fingers. She will not be named in the report. Only her role in receiving the scholarship under coercive circumstances. The details of her past, the incident with the donor's son, and her private testimony remain sealed. Should she choose to speak, the platform is hers. And Carlo, he leaves town tomorrow. Saul has arranged a quiet position in Boston. Anonymous, safe. No one will trace him. The Foundation has no reason to pursue him now they know he's been spoken for. I leaned against the desk. You're unusually merciful today. No, Wolfe said. I am complete. There is a difference. There was a knock at the door. Fritz entered with a silver tray, bearing coffee and a small plate of buttered scones. I took the liberty, Fritz said. You have not eaten. Wolfe gave him a look that qualified as genuine thanks, and Fritz exited without a word. I sat. Wolfe didn't speak again for a while. He sipped his coffee, closed his eyes once, and finally said, You may call Miss Tulland. I made the call. She arrived an hour later, hair pinned up again, face pale, but set with something stronger than guilt resolve. She didn't sit until Wolfe gestured, didn't speak until invited. I assume you've made your decision, she said. No, Wolfe corrected. Mr. Pruitt made his. You must now make yours. I handed her a copy of the signed confession. She took it. Read it slowly. Her eyes moved like they were dragging her heart with them. When she finished, she exhaled a breath that had clearly been sitting in her lungs for days. I knew some of this, she said, but not all. I told myself the scholarship was the best option available to her. It was the best option for the Foundation, Wolfe said, not for Miss Strelick. Claire didn't deny it. So what now? You will not resign. Wolfe said, that would be a coward's exit, and I do not believe you are a coward. She blinked. You will remain in your position until the board removes you or asks you to stay. You will submit to the audit. You will testify, if necessary, to what you knew when you knew it, and what you did with that knowledge. You will protect Miss Strelick's privacy, and you will, if you are permitted to stay, restructure the scholarship process with the integrity you claim to value. Claire's voice was quiet, and if I fail, you will be remembered as the woman who folded under pressure after preserving a lie, not the one who rebuilt the institution she once failed. She nodded once, then twice, and stood. May I see her? Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Miss Strelick, Claire clarified. I'd like to speak to her. Apologize, if she'll hear it. I will ask, Wolfe said. You will not insist. She left a few minutes later. No dramatic exit. No tears. Just the quiet shuffle of shoes on wood as she walked back into the world she'd helped twist. I turned to Wolfe. You really think she can fix it? She cannot unbreak what was shattered, but she may keep it from breaking further. It wasn't exactly optimism, but for Wolfe, it was something close. That afternoon, I delivered the envelope to the Carrington Foundation's board chair, a retired judge who accepted it with both hands like it might explode. He didn't ask questions. just nodded once and closed the door. By nightfall, it had started to spread not in the press, not in headlines, but in boardrooms and private inboxes. The kind of spreading that makes people sweat and shred documents. At 8:17 p.m., Wolfe turned in early, said nothing, just stood, straightened his cuffs, and disappeared upstairs. I stayed up late, rereading Pruitt's confession. The language was tidy, rehearsed even. But between the lines, it was all there, every manipulation, every pivot, every silence bought with a scholarship check and a smile. And at the end, one sentence. I thought I could control the damage, but I became it. I poured myself a drink. The city hummed outside. The brownstone, as always, stood still. We didn't arrest anyone. We didn't headline anything. But Wolfe had cracked it wide open without ever leaving his chair. And the man who thought justice could be managed like a PR crisis had been outmaneuvered by a spoon, a waiter, and a girl who slipped the truth into a speech dressed as thanks. The brownstone settled back into its natural state in the days that followed, silent, insulated, and organized with the precision of a monarch's private vault. Fritz resumed his reign over the kitchen. The orchids upstairs responded well to Wolfe's renewed attention, and I finally caught up on my filing. But like any good mystery that ends with a whisper instead of a bang, there were lingering echoes, some louder than others. Minna Drellick didn't return to the city immediately. Saul kept her location tight. And Wolfe made it clear she should not be contacted unless she initiated it herself. That didn't stop Claire Tolland from trying. She wrote a letter, handwritten. No courier, no email, just an envelope with careful ink strokes and the weight of overdue repentance. Wolfe read it before it was forwarded. Not out of mistrust, out of protocol. She regrets her complicity, Wolfe told me. But more importantly, she acknowledges it. That makes her worth watching. And Pruitt? I asked. Removed, Wolfe said. The board acted quietly. No press release. No scandal. A mutual parting of ways and a generous severance. He will surface again smiling, hired by someone eager to weaponize his charm. I didn't argue. The city had a talent for recycling men like Pruitt. Put them in a new office, slap a new title on their door, and pretend the past was a misquote. Claire, on the other hand, stayed. The foundation board had kept her on in a restricted capacity while the audit continued. Her name was now attached to policy rewrites, public-facing reforms, and a scholarship re-evaluation initiative. It was all very clean, very redemptive. But Wolfe didn't buy the packaging. She is not absolved, he said. She is simply useful. One afternoon, she stopped by the brownstone unannounced, but not unwelcome. I met her at the door. She looked different, not lighter, exactly, but more solid. Less like a statue trying to balance on a crack, and more like someone who decided the floor was going to shift either way. I won't stay long, she said. I'll let him know. Wolfe met her in the office. No theatrics, no positioning, just two chairs. One truth. She didn't sit. I wanted you to know I met with Minna. She agreed to see me. It was brief. She didn't forgive me, but she thanked me for not turning away when it got hard. That, Wolfe said, is the closest thing to grace you will receive. Claire nodded. That's all I wanted. As she left, she paused at the door. You're not what I expected. I never am, Wolfe replied. That night, Wolfe didn't comment on the visit. He returned to his book, his orchids, his chair. But there was something in his silence a finished thread, not a frayed one. Later in the week, I met Carlo for coffee before he left town. We kept it low-key corner booth, back of a diner in the Bronx. 2 stools between us, and anyone who looked like they knew what a foundation gala even was. He looked better, said his sister had lined up a kitchen job in Cambridge. No more events, no more tuxedo aprons, just food and peace. Why'd you write that letter? I asked. He shrugged. I don't like watching people get away with things just because they know which fork to use. You scared? Yeah. But less now. Good, I said. Stay scared enough to stay sharp, but not so scared you stop looking people in the eye. He smiled at that. I paid for the coffee, and we said goodbye. Just 2 guys in a diner, the world still spinning around them, a few ugly truths lighter. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was on the phone with the university's ethics office. He was outlining the need for external monitors in institutional reviews. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, watched the way he paused between clauses, how each phrase landed like a chess piece. When he hung up, he turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, we will now restore order to the house, to everything. We reorganized the files, returned the unused correspondence to the safe, and destroyed the annotated copy of Pruitt's confession. The original remained sealed in Wolfe's locked drawer, under a new tab marked simply DR1. At dinner, Wolfe praised Fritz's trout amandine and poured himself a second glass of wine. That alone told me the storm had passed. Afterward, I sat by the window, looking at the street. The city kept moving. Traffic lights blinked their indifference. Somewhere out there, another lie was being dressed up as mercy, and someone else was, probably about to swallow it with a smile. But not here, not under this roof. Wolfe didn't say much that evening. Around 10, he offered one of his rare reflections, quiet, shaped like an afterthought, but heavy enough to sink an ocean liner. Justice, Mr. Goodwin, he said, is rarely warm, but when served cold, it must still be plated with precision. I nodded, writing it down in my head. Think she'll recover? I asked. Which she? Minna. She has already, Wolfe said. The moment she rewrote the speech, the moment she told the truth. Recovery is not restoration, it is the choice not to be silent. And Claire, he was quiet a moment. Then, she is still deciding what version of herself is worth saving. That was as close to hope as Wolfe ever got. I shut the light, left him to his thoughts, and closed the door behind me. The brownstone exhaled again. No visitors, no disturbances, no performance, just stillness, precision, and beneath it all, a truth that had finally been heard. 3 weeks passed before the last note arrived. It came by post, no return address, plain envelope, careful script. Wolfe opened it at breakfast, sniffed at the handwriting like it might reek of sentimentality. then passed it to me without comment. It was from Minna. I've decided not to press charges. Not now. I'm working, taking classes, sleeping through the night. I'm not healed, but I'm free. Thank you for not rescuing me, for just listening. Wolfe said nothing. He folded the letter neatly, placed it in the center drawer of his desk, and resumed his eggs. That was how it ended, not with an indictment or a courtroom confession, but a line in a letter and the quiet return of equilibrium. The Carrington Foundation completed its audit. A few faces changed. A few policies were rewritten. The world, by and large, moved on. Pruitt vanished from the public eye. Word had it he took a contract overseas, something involving branding for a startup in Berlin. The man could sell sanctimony in 6 languages. I wasn't surprised. Claire remained in place. Her name now attached to a report on ethical restructuring that got a polite write-up in the Times. She didn't reach out again. She didn't have to. Her silence this time wasn't evasion, it was endurance. Carlos sent a postcard from Boston. A skyline, a note. Things taste better when no one's lying across the table. I pinned it on the fridge. As for Wolfe, he didn't gloat, didn't reflect. He returned to his orchids, his beer, and his unreadable books on Napoleonic warfare. But I noticed something had shifted, however slightly. He no longer flinched when the doorbell rang. He no longer frowned at the sound of the mail slot. The brownstone had absorbed the disruption and come out whole. One night, near the end of the month, Wolfe called me into the office after dinner. No urgency, just a low Archie from down the hall. He was seated at his desk, a glass of sherry in one hand, a leather-bound notebook open before him. "You have something for me?" I asked. He motioned to the chair. "No, I have something for myself." I sat. "This case," he said slowly, "offered no corpse, no knife, no locked door, not even a decent bribe. And yet," he continued, "it contained the full anatomy of malice, manipulation, concealment, the repackaging of harm. As redemption, crimes of character rather than statute. Not as clean as a gunshot. No," he said, "far more insidious." I waited. He tapped the notebook. "We solved nothing." I blinked. "You cracked the whole structure open." I said, "We solved nothing." He repeated. "We revealed. We arranged." But justice was not ours to dispense, it was theirs to accept or refuse. I knew what he meant. We hadn't changed the system. We'd interrupted it. Maybe that was enough. He sipped the sherry, then set the glass down. "Minna Drellick will not remember me. Carlo will not speak of me. And Claire Tolland will not thank me. That is as it should be. And you're fine." "With that, I am," he said, "because the only justice I trust is the kind I can place in order. The rest belongs to chance." He leaned back in the chair, stared at the ceiling. "The spoon," he murmured. "What about it?" It was a warning, yes, but it was also a confession. Pruitt believed he could set the table of truth and choose which utensils we used. He was wrong. I smiled. "You always did prefer forks." "I prefer clarity," Wolfe said, "and clarity, Mr. Goodwin, is the rarest dish of all." I left him there with his thoughts, the sherry warming under the lamp. and the city humming quietly through the windows. Outside, the brownstone loomed still and untouched. Inside, just a scold, quiet and exact had been served.